Over the millennia since the Battle of Ruusan, many Jedi engaged Sith Lords of the Bainite line, but none lived to tell the tale, preserving the Order's secrecy. Qui-Gon Jinn was the first exception. The former apprentice of the famed Jedi Swordmaster Dooku, Qui-Gon Jinn was a revered and powerful member of the Order, but also an unconventional maverick, frequently butting heads with the Jedi Council. A great swordmaster and teacher, Jinn successfully trained 2 Padawans as Jedi Knights, though his second pupil, Xanatos, fell to the dark side and became one of his long-standing enemies. While rescuing the Naboo Queen Amidala from captivity at the hands of the occupying Trade Federation, he and her entourage were forced to stop off at Tatooine. Here, Qui-Gon encountered the young Anakin Skywalker, a local slave boy who displayed latent signs of Force sensitivity. Discovering the extent of the child's untapped potential, Jinn became convinced that he was the chosen one of prophecy, destined to bring balance to the Force. Jinn masterminded Skywalker's release from servitude and spirited him away to the Jedi Temple for evaluation, though not before being attacked by the Sith apprentice Darth Maul, whom he narrowly escaped. Frustrated by the Jedi Council's refusal to accept Skywalker for training, citing his age, Jinn was sent to accompany Queen Amidala back to Naboo, ostensibly to act as her bodyguard, but in truth, to attempt to apprehend Darth Maul, should he show himself again. Maul did not disappoint, and Jinn, aided by his latest student, Obi-Wan Kenobi, engaged the Sith Lord. After a lengthy duel through the Naboo plasma refinery, Jinn was separated from Kenobi and overwhelmed by Maul's powerful offensive. Kenobi narrowly bested the Sith warrior on his own, though too late to save Jinn's life. With his last breath, Jinn made Kenobi promise to train Anakin Skywalker as his own student. Transcending the material plane as a Force spirit, Qui-Gon Jinn returned to aid his surviving friends and colleagues in their time of crisis, the Great Jedi Purge.
After the fall of Darth Malgus and the destruction of the Star Forge in 3956 BBY, the galaxy would enjoy a time of much-deserved peace, with the Republic and its battered Jedi Order reasserting themselves as the galaxy's monarchs of justice and stability. This peace would be shattered when the resurgent Sith Empire under Emperor Vitiate attacked Republic space, their main objective being total galactic conquest and the utter annihilation of the Jedi Order. This would plunge the galaxy into nearly a decade of violent warfare, the Great Galactic War as it would become known, pushing galactic civilization to the point of near collapse. As tensions rose over the prospect of a never-ending war, the Sith surprised everyone with an offer of a peace treaty with the very Republic they sought to destroy. Realizing that it was an offer they could not refuse, the Republic's diplomats and a majority of the Jedi Order would convey a meeting on Alderaan where peace talks could be held. However, the Sith still had one final move to make. As during the peace talks, a large battalion of Sith led by Darth Malgus would launch a full-scale invasion of Coruscant, with the Jedi Temple being the focal point for the Sith's wrath. Due to the majority of the Order being off-world, only a handful of Jedi Masters were left to rally a suitable defense against the Sith invaders. Ven Zallow was one such master. Renowned by friend and foe alike as a powerful adept of the Force, Zallow fought at the head of the Jedi's defense during the sacking of Coruscant, personally slaying nearly half a dozen Sith before being confronted by Malgus himself, who viewed Zallow as the only Jedi in the temple worthy of his skill. Engaging the Sith Lord in a vicious lightsaber duel through the temple, Zallow was ultimately cut down by Malgus, his death signaling the Jedi's defeat on Coruscant. Ven Zallow's death would not go unnoticed, as his former apprentice, Aaron Lanier, who was stationed on Alderaan at the time of Zallow's death, would attempt to avenge him, though she ultimately abandoned her quest and left the Jedi Order. Hey guys, EvanNova95 and Jen Sarai here, and welcome to our first ever collaborative versus video. We know how much you guys have wanted us to work together, so today we're making it happen. Just to be clear, while this video is featured on my channel, we will be following the format that Jen Sarai used in his Chaos and Darach vs Sora Bulk and Warb Null vs Kakruk videos, laying out each section in order of relevance rather than the format I typically employ. As both combatants are dedicated martial artists and swordsmen, the verdict for this fight ultimately comes down to their skills in that area, all other factors being secondary. Jen Sarai, aka Mr. Qui-Gon Jinn, will handle Jinn statistics, while I will be covering Ven Zallow's, a character that has actually really grown on me as of late. With that out of the way, we bring you Qui-Gon Jinn versus Ven Zallow. Let's begin.
By the time of his death in 32 BBY, Qui-Gon Jinn was in his late 50s, extremely fit but well past his prime. Large and powerfully built, Jinn's greatest asset was his strength, an asset that he would be forced to rely on increasingly as he aged, as his stamina and agility would be hit the hardest, fatigue being half the reason he lost to Darth Maul. That being said, Jinn was not made of glass, and while not likely to come out ahead in a war of attrition, he has proved that he can keep pace with much younger opponents for long stretches of time. He may not be a tank, but he can take a hit. Qui-Gon Jinn's lightsaber followed the custom of his day, and featured an elaborate internal design. The scalloped hand grip was composed of numerous small power cells, which allowed Jinn more control over the lightsaber's electrical charge levels. Microscopic circuitry governed the nature of the blade. The activator was a simple red button on the upper third of the hilt, while the charging port was along the bottom third near the pommel. Jinn utilized a single green-hued Adagan crystal as the focusing lens. All in all, a sophisticated piece of equipment and a proven weapon.
Ven Zallow was a human male who appeared to be in his late 30s to early 40s. He possessed well-developed speed, agility, and strength, though nothing beyond the level typically attained by trained Force sensitives. Zallow wielded a standard green-bladed lightsaber of a bulky but simple design, and wore a full set of Jedi battle armor. While the specifics of Zallow's armor are a bit vague, we can draw some parallels with the armor worn by the Jedi Battle Master Chaos and Darach, who wore a similar set. In addition to providing minor protection from blaster bolts and stabbing weapons, Darach's armor could take a light hit from a lightsaber, though a committed strike would cut through it as easily as anything else. Since all Jedi battle armor of the era followed the same basic design and was readily available to the Order en masse, I think it's safe to say that Zallow's armor provided similar, if not identical, benefits. Similar to the physical and weaponry verdict in my Luke Skywalker vs Mace Windu video, the only tipping points for Qui-Gon Jinn versus Ven Zallow are age and the usefulness of their weaponry.
Despite being in incredibly good health for a man of his years, Jinn's capabilities are nonetheless hampered by the natural effects of old age, while Zallow still appeared to be within his physical prime, even if he is at the tail end of it.
Both utilize fairly standard lightsabers, though Zallow's armor does provide a moderately superior level of defense. While the armor is a bit unreliable as far as lightsabers are concerned, some protection is better than no protection at all.
We want to make clear that this is an exceedingly minor advantage for Zallow, as the overall effect his armor has on his combative ability is minimal, and if Jinn can keep pace with Darth Maul for such a lengthy period, then he sure as hell can keep up with Zallow.
But, as minor as it may be, Ven Zallow gets the physical and weaponry edge.
Qui-Gon Jinn was noted as one of the greatest Force wielders of his day, possessed of a strong connection to the living Force, which was, among other things, the source from which all practical Force abilities are derived. Even as a Padawan, Jinn was of the opinion that the living Force represented the essence of the Jedi calling, and he ultimately considered himself to be a pure instrument of the Force. Allowing the living Force to direct his actions, he favored following his instincts ahead of planning in all that he did, including in how he applied his Force abilities. Guided by his supreme reverence for the Force, he only employed its power as needed, as directed by his instincts. Qui-Gon was reasonably skilled with basic physical augmentation, boosting his speed, agility, and reflexes to superhuman levels, enabling him to perform blast deflection and superhuman acrobatics, as well as the various other feats for which the Jedi were famed. However, Jinn never took this ability to its nth degree in the same manner as other great Ataru masters, such as Yoda or Shakti, so much of his combat effectiveness was rooted in his native physical capabilities. Qui-Gon's skill with telekinesis was also considerable, but his need to concentrate and gather his energies hampered his ability to apply it in combat. While capable of chaining Force-based attacks into his lightsaber sequences, it was not without considerable difficulty, and he often needed to lower his guard while concentrating. He has used telekinetic attacks while sparring or when engaging regular soldiers and battle droids, but he has never been depicted using such attacks in serious lightsaber duels against opposing Force wielders. Jinn had a great deal of aptitude with Force-based telepathy and suggestion, and in fact has been criticized for his over-reliance on this skill. He's been able to compel weak-willed individuals to do his bidding, influencing their memories or inducing relaxation and sleep, and has even been able to influence members of certain species noted for a natural resistance to telepathy, such as Hutts, though Toydarians were beyond his power. He'd also been able to telepathically communicate with living subjects, sending messages or probing for information. It's never been established whether or not he can forcibly probe the minds of unwilling individuals, though I'm inclined to think that he can't. Arguably, Qui-Gon's most notable power was his ability to transcend the material plane as a Force spirit, surviving his physical death. While a powerful Force wielder, Qui-Gon Jinn invested most of his time and energy into developing his utility powers rather than his combative ones. As a result, he is neither quick on the draw nor a heavy hitter, though he maintains a reasonable level of effectiveness. His reputation may have been due primarily to his academic and philosophical insights into the Force, but he was ultimately a major force to be reckoned with.
Ven Zallow was not an overwhelmingly powerful Force wielder, and it seemed clear to me that his main focus was on the development of his lightsaber combat rather than his Force abilities. This isn't to say that he was incapable. As a Jedi Master, he would no doubt carry with him a well-developed understanding of the Force. And Darth Malgus himself even took notice of Zallow's power in comparison to the other Jedi present in the temple. It's just that the development of his combative Force powers was not his primary focus. He was an expert in using the Force to augment his physical capabilities, allowing him to pull off various superhuman feats. In addition to the augmented reflexes required for blast deflection, Zallow was particularly adept at bolstering his ability to withstand physical injury, as he was able to recover relatively quickly after being thrown through a mountain of rubble after Malgus blasted him with a force push. He possessed a solid level of skill with telekinesis, as demonstrated when he sent the Imperial agent Alina Daru flying into a wall with a well-placed force push. However, the effectiveness of Zallow's telekinesis against other trained force wielders is unknown, as he has never been depicted employing force-based attacks in live combat with opposing force wielders. While this could easily be attributed to the lack of available information on Zallow, I think we can safely assume that he refrains from using such abilities against other force wielders because they would be largely ineffective. However, it is also possible that he simply prefers to rely on his martial prowess ahead of his combative force abilities because he knows where his strengths lie. Either way, Zallow was not a committed telekinetic savant, though he was far from incapable. No information has ever been covered on the nature of Zallow's telepathic abilities, though we can assume he was competent with the basic mind trick, where he influences the minds of weak-willed individuals to do his bidding. On the whole, Ven Zallow possessed a basic, rudimentary skill set that was common to all Jedi. He may have elevated his skills to a high degree, worthy of a Jedi Master, though at the end of the day, that is all that could be really said about them.
Qui-Gon Jinn may be a renowned Force wielder, but much of his fame comes from his philosophical understanding and attunement to it, rather than true combative ability, which in turn leaves him vulnerable to various unorthodox Force-based assaults. Fortunately for Qui-Gon, though, Ven Zallow isn't really bringing anything new to the table.
Both are adept in bolstering their physical capabilities, and both possess a solid level of skill with telekinesis, though neither of them use it frequently in the midst of combat.
While Jinn may possess a significantly greater aptitude with Force-based telepathy, such abilities are useless against other Force wielders trained to resist such influence, and Jinn's ability to transcend the physical plane as a Force spirit obviously wouldn't come into play as it isn't combative in nature.
At the end of the day, neither combatant is going to get the edge over the other through their Force abilities, as neither of them are committed combative Force wielders, nor does one hold any sort of ability drastically foreign to the other that would affect the outcome of this contest. We proclaim Qui-Gon Jinn and Ven Zallow equals as Force wielders.
A prodigy with the lightsaber from a very young age, Qui-Gon Jinn was regarded by his 400-year-old lightsaber instructor as his finest student, and hailed as one of the most able swordsmen in the Jedi Order. Qui-Gon Jinn's chosen martial arts discipline was Ataru, the fourth form of classical Jedi lightsaber combat. Created to answer the deficiencies of Surisu, the defense-oriented third form, Ataru was an extremely aggressive fighting style based around flamboyant, elaborate swordplay and a heavy reliance on Force-assisted acrobatics. While a solid general-purpose fighting style, incorporating training in both dual-blade fencing and unarmed combat, Form 4 was also noted to be an exhaustive practice best employed in short bursts. Qui-Gon Jinn was no textbook Ataru master, but a martial arts innovator who reconfigured the style into something better suited to his own needs, scaling back the more flamboyant elements in favor of a more direct and strength-oriented method. Much of Qui-Gon's power came from his continued adherence to the Ataru form's emphasis on using the entire body as a weapon. He committed himself absolutely to every maneuver, performing every single strike with his entire body. There are no casual wrist flick strikes or parries from this guy. Everything he does is extremely physical. Accordingly, he was an expert in the use of unarmed combat techniques, regularly chaining punches and kicks into his lightsaber sequences, and although he scaled back this element, he was an extremely capable acrobat, his overall fighting style remaining very dynamic and agile. Jinn's revision of Ataru allowed him to take full advantage of all of the form's assets, while compensating for all of its weaknesses, at least to a certain extent. Though still extremely demanding and exhaustive in its own right, Jinn's method was much more sustainable than traditional Ataru, affording him a greater level of combative longevity than that enjoyed by more conventional masters. While skilled marksmen could still penetrate his guard, his capability with blast deflection was still a major improvement, to the point where he could employ targeted deflections as a form of counterattack. Though he had difficulty combating organized opposition, Jinn had no problem engaging disorganized gaggles of enemies, whereas traditional Ataru was specialized towards one-on-one engagements. The influence of Dooku was clearly felt in Qui-Gon Jinn's tactics. During a 2-on-1 sparring match with his students, Xanatos and Femur, Jinn employed a clever defensive tactic where he deflected and evaded each combatant as they came on, allowing him to engage them one at a time rather than both at once, a tactic that Dooku has been observed relying on quite frequently. During a later duel with Xanatos, he exploited his knowledge of his former pupil's psychology and fighting style to manipulate and goad him, gaining a momentary advantage, another tactic heavily favored by Dooku. However, for every similarity between master and student, there are just as many differences. Where Dooku prized strategic planning, controlling fights by anticipating and manipulating his adversaries, Qui-Gon emphasized intuition and tactical improvisation, being more concerned with adapting to changing circumstances than with being able to control those circumstances. In a philosophical sense, this was a very enlightened approach, allowing Jinn to be at harmony with his surroundings and in tune with the living force. But in a practical sense, it was a very mixed bag. On the one hand, making him extremely versatile, but on the other hand, leaving him without a clear game plan. Qui-Gon Jinn was a gambler with a stacked deck, an expert at exploiting chaos to achieve his own ends, but at a serious disadvantage against someone with a more complete strategy in mind. And nowhere is this better demonstrated than in his dedicated offensive approach. While Jinn has been observed incorporating various clever tactics into his offensives, at the end of the day his typical method of attack was little more than a straightforward attempt to power through his adversary's defenses. And though the combination of his sophisticated technique and his still formidable physical attributes made this aggressive tactic quite potent, he ultimately lacked variation. Fortunately, Qui-Gon's commitment to offense didn't prevent him from occupying a more passive role in combat, and as indicated by his conduct while sparring with Xanatos and Femur, his typical defensive approach was to avoid direct confrontation, outmaneuvering or shunting aside adversaries. However, when incapable of accomplishing this, he does what he can to eke out a defense, all the while working hard to fight back. That being said, he was able to hold off Darth Maul's committed and highly focused Zhuya-style offensive for quite a substantial period of time, indicating that he can defend himself against anything less than that caliber of attack. At the end of the day, Qui-Gon Jinn was an extremely capable duelist, combining advanced skill and decades of refinement with adaptability and experience. His lack of foresight and straightforward tendencies may have been major weaknesses, but his intuitive genius and absolute commitment to the here and now were his greatest strengths. His deviations from the norm did leave him hampered in some ways, but it gave him other, unique advantages, and he was ultimately a credit to his teachers and to his order.
Ven Zallow was one of the most renowned sword masters of his day. with the Sith Lord Darth Malgus, one of the greatest lightsaber duelists of his era, considering him his most famous kill, more so than the battle master Keo-Sen Darach, whom Malgus had slain earlier in his career. While he ultimately lost his bout with the hulking Sith Lord, Ven managed to hold out for a lengthy period of time, as well as personally slaying at least half a dozen other Sith Lords during the sacking of Coruscant. Zallow's primary fighting form has not been confirmed in any source, though we can of course evaluate the information presented to us and make an educated guess. He displayed a clear preference for force-assisted acrobatics and unpredictable, speed-oriented blade work, which suggests Zallow's preferred form is Ataru, the fourth form of classical lightsaber combat. However, unlike the aforementioned Qui-Gon Jinn, who modified the style to better suit the needs of his flagging physical condition, Ven Zallow's application of the fighting form was as textbook Ataru as could be. When fighting offensively, Ven Zallow relied heavily on speed, using flamboyant full-body movements to unleash quick, devastating lightsaber strikes, no doubt making use of Ataru's primary moves, the Su-Ma rotations. Rarely is this guy not moving. This focus on speed was likely a response to the necessities of the battlefield, as many Jedi of Ven's era were involved in semi-regular lightsaber engagements with the Sith Empire. He can't afford to waste time out-fencing each Sith Lord individually, lest he leave himself vulnerable to counterattack. So instead, he focuses on rapidly overwhelming one opponent, then immediately moving on to the next. Attack, overwhelm, kill. Attack, overwhelm, kill. Rinse and repeat. Another defining attribute of his technique was the integration of physical strikes into his lightsaber sequences, adding credence to his implied Form 4 training. During his fight with Darth Malgus, Zallow mustered his strength and landed a punch so hard that it dislodged Malgus's breath mask as well as one of his teeth. His defense was as similarly flamboyant as his offense, using quick parries and acrobatic evasions to dodge incoming lightsaber strikes, and he was highly adept at using the momentum generated from a prior engagement to counter an oncoming assault from a completely different angle. However, he displayed noticeable difficulty meeting power attacks head-to-head, and when backed into a corner, he got into trouble really quick, trying every trick in the book to keep from being steamrolled by his opponent. His elaborate movements would also leave him exposed to quick counterattacks, a weakness that ended up costing him his life. What we essentially get with Ven Zallow are the primary tenets of Form 4 lightsaber combat, refined to an incredibly high degree. A powerful, acrobatic skill set based around quickly overwhelming targets, but at the cost of defensive viability and overall combat longevity.
One of the major aspects of the Ataru form is its sacrifice of defensive viability and combative longevity in the name of immediate offensive might, the style being built around the idea of one hit, one kill.
For this reason, a battle between two traditional Form 4 masters would be over and done with very quickly, which makes a hypothetical contest between Qui-Gon Jinn and Ven Zallow very unusual, because Jinn is anything but a traditional Form 4 master.
Qui-Gon Jinn and Ven Zallow were very different individuals who lived through very different circumstances, and this is reflected by their divergent applications of Form 4 lightsaber combat.
Zallow is easily the more experienced of the two, having engaged Sith Lords on the battlefield on a regular basis for years. However, while live combat experience of this nature is an excellent foundation for an effective fighting style, the limitations of this sort of experience must also be understood. Battlefields are not forgiving environments, and offer virtually no leeway for experimentation, as any mistake will result in instant death. As a result, wartime lightsaber duelists have very little incentive to try anything new or innovative, instead gravitating towards the tried and true. Accordingly, Ven Zallow's application of Ataru was textbook.
While Jinn may not have a personal familiarity with Ven Zallow, the fact that Zallow is employing a very textbook application of the very martial art that Jinn has not only mastered but completely overhauled means that Jinn would be able to suss him out very quickly.
Furthermore, as a wartime duelist, Zallow's emphasis was on rapidly overcoming one foe as to immediately move on to the next. On the battlefield, one can't afford to be caught up in an extended engagement with a single opponent, lest he leave himself exposed to other dangers. As this is precisely the sort of engagement that Ataru is already optimized for, it means that Zallow has even less incentive to customize his application of it, as it is already so perfectly suited for his needs. Zallow may have the stamina to hold down a marathon lightsaber duel, but his absolute dedication to offense causes him to fall into very predictable patterns. Not normally a big deal for someone who is typically engaging in a long series of short fights, but a serious problem in a protracted duel with a single opponent.
This failing contributed directly to his death at Darth Malgus' hands, and would be something that a strong improvisational fighter like Qui-Gon Jinn would definitely be able to pick up on and exploit. Additionally, Dooku's influence on Qui-Gon Jinn was not isolated to his tactics, but also showed itself in his technique. Simply put, Qui-Gon employed Ataru with the mentality of a Makashi master.
Specialists in Form 2 lightsaber combat dedicate themselves to developing unique offenses and defenses, continuously revising and refining their technique in order to be as unpredictable as possible.
While Jinn's revisionist application of Ataru was largely based on his own practical requirements, it is clear that the Form 2 mentality of avoiding predictability by steering clear of textbook applications of any given technique was a major influence on him, and also very in keeping with his personality, given that he was a maverick who was largely motivated by a desire to be different purely for the sake of being different. And I want to be on record saying that I see Qui-Gon Jinn's revision of Ataru as superior to traditional applications of the form.
Aside from Makashi's weakness in blast deflection, all other forms have a certain degree of flexibility that allows them to be applied effectively in virtually any combat situation. While Ataru has relevance in any situation, its complete lack of defensive viability and combative longevity means that it cannot be solely relied upon.
When one examines what the Ataru form offers, that being an elaborate offensive technique, unarmed combat skills, and dual-blade fencing, it becomes clear almost immediately that it was intended purely to be a supplementary form and not something to be solely relied upon. Traditional Ataru is not a complete school of combat. It is not a well-rounded, fully fledged martial art. What Qui-Gon Jinn did was to make it a well-rounded, fully fledged martial art.
He takes full advantage of everything the style offers, but he doesn't put all his eggs in one basket, devising fallback options and improving his versatility.
He can match the offensive output of traditional masters like Ven Zallow, but has alternative techniques and personalized elements that he can fall back on when that sort of pure offense fails. Ven Zallow doesn't.
We declare Qui-Gon Jinn the victor.
And that's a wrap, ladies and gentlemen.
Well guys, we hope you enjoyed our very first collaborative versus video. As always, you are free to leave suggestions for future battles in the comment section below. Be sure to check out Jenserai's channel if you haven't already done so, and we'll see you guys later.